Hey, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. Try to maximize the use of this time that we've got with two phenomenal nuclear experts here at the Center on Global Energy Policy. We've got Matt Bowen and Ashley Finan, and we appreciate you all being with us. It is very timely to have a conversation on nuclear, not only with the new executive orders that President Trump has issued, but there's an awful lot going on with nuclear in Congress. Think the reconciliation bill and the Inflation Reduction Act incentives. There's also budget requests in terms of how to fund the Nuclear Energy Office at the Department of Energy, staff, NRC, loan program impacts on nuclear, et cetera, et cetera. So there's an awful lot to talk about. I'll just set the scene and then kick off a question with Matt and Ashley. I've got a few questions prepared to try to solicit what I think are going to be the most interesting questions, the most relevant questions, the most timely questions for the group here today. But we're going to open it up soon for questions from the audience as well and try to maximize the time so that you can get your questions answered as well. So already start thinking of your questions, already starting putting your questions, and we'll try to moderate that and facilitate and get to as many as we possibly can as well. This is a series, as you saw in the promotional materials, that we're trying to do at Columbia Center on Global Energy Policy to make sure that we're providing timely information to provide our experts for availability in sessions, informal sessions like this. So hopefully you're not only participating in this one on nuclear energy, but you'll keep an eye out for future episodes as well. Let me just set the scene, and I'm going to start, Matt and Ashley, with a broader question on where we're at with nuclear power in our country, existing reactors, small modular reactors, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll start by asking a bit of a loaded question, if you will, just some observations from my perspective, including having been at the Department of Energy for the last 4-year period of time. It does feel like we have a particular moment and opportunity here on nuclear energy. It doesn't mean that we will fully take advantage of that opportunity, but I say that for a number of reasons. First, if you look at what we need in terms of the grid and new electricity demand coming online, for the last 15 years or so, we've had relatively flat electricity demand in the United States. That is changing. That is changing significantly with artificial intelligence and data centers. That's probably what gets the most attention, but there's also additional demand coming throughout the economy, both in terms of economic activity, manufacturing facilities more generally, but also electrification. Think transportation, think heat pumps, think other electrification as well. So going from a period of relatively flat electricity demand to one that's ramping up quite significantly offers up an opportunity for a variety of sources, but certainly offers up an opportunity for clean baseload power to complement what's happening with solar, complement what's happening with other parts going forward. Secondly, as someone who's lived and breathed the last 4 years, but now what's going on in Congress in terms of the pendulum swinging back and forth on energy policy, climate policy in our country, nuclear seems to, and again, good for Matt and Ashley to unpack this as well, seems to have good, strong bipartisan support. It was certainly a priority in the Biden administration. I can attest to that personally, and it's something that President Trump, Secretary Wright, and others have spoken about, and obviously these executive orders are focused on the nuclear space as well. I've had endless conversations with folks on from the Republican side, from the Democratic side, in terms of that bipartisan support. And when you look at the range of technologies that are out there in the energy space, some have strong bipartisan support, but many are a little bit more politicized, unfortunately, in my book, because I think these issues should be a lot less politicized than they are. But good to get our panelists' take on that issue. And then the third dynamic, which I think is also important, is progress begets more progress. Success begets more success. And we have seen some success in nuclear in the last few-year period of time. So certainly restarting the Palisades plant in Michigan and using the loan program for that. We brought on some new reactors, AP1000s down in Georgia. That's a big deal in our country. Obviously, that took quite a few years and some significant budget as well, but we are making progress with existing nuclear. And then there's, of course, the investment from the federal government side, from a variety of different companies on the advanced reactors of the future, the small modular reactors as well. So let me, having loaded the question, let me ask our two panelists And Matt and Ashley, if you can just introduce yourselves briefly so that folks know who we're dealing with here as you answer your question. Give us a sense of where nuclear is in the country, both where there are opportunities, but also challenges. And let's try to keep it brief so that we can get into the heart of the matter with the EOs and other dynamics going on right now. Matt, over to you.
Sure, thanks, Dave. And you hit on a lot of top level points. There have been a lot of promising developments recently, possible new restarts of reactors that closed, maybe some new builds, maybe the canceled reactors at VC Summer will come back. We've had promising developments across the border in Canada. First construction permit for a commercial scale SMR issued earlier this year, and Tennessee Valley Authority just submitted a construction permit application to build the same type of reactor, the GE Hitachi BWRX 300. As you kind of alluded to, we had these hyperscaler announcements last year, Google and Amazon announcing deals with high temperature reactors. Meta just announced that they were going to take power from an existing power plant and potentially build new ones in the future. There's a lot of reform going on at the NRC, thanks to leadership there and laws like the Fiscal Responsibility Act and the Advance Act. So I think there's a lot of promise. I think people will hold off declaring success until somebody goes out and builds one of these reactors in what I'd call a reasonable amount of time and reasonable cost. First of a kind mega projects are hard and costly. We still don't have any climate policy in the United States forcing any sector to decarbonize. There are, as you alluded to, threats to tax credits that new nuclear would qualify for, DOE loan programs that could support new nuclear, potential cuts to budgets and staff at DOE and NRC. Public support is sort of uneven around the United States. And as I think we'll talk about, the executive orders this year sort of have some good and some bad, at least in my view.
Sorry, I tried to mute myself so I wouldn't get in the way of Matt's very succinct and very helpful summary. Ashley, anything you want to chime in on, both in the opportunity space and the progress, but also some challenges, and then we'll get into some specifics with the EOs and reconciliation and a number of other areas as well.
Sure, absolutely. I think Matt covered most of it, so thanks, Matt. I guess I'll just add, Dave, to your first point about increasing electricity demand, we haven't seen robust increasing electricity demand in the US for many decades. And it's really hard to innovate without growth. We've been struggling to do that for decades now in nuclear and doing a lot of important foundational work to develop new designs, to develop the AP1000, the BWRX 300, and others, and to move towards demonstration. But we haven't had that demand signal. And the lack of a demand signal, I think, is really troubling to the many stakeholders that need to come together to develop projects. So having that demand signal is a huge opportunity for nuclear, as well as other new energy technologies and energy technologies that just haven't quite gotten over that valley of death yet. So I think that's a huge opportunity. We have had some challenging cost and schedule overruns in nuclear, but we have Holtec reporting right now that the Palisades work is on budget and on schedule, or even a little bit ahead. So that's a good sign. And then, I think that the number of projects that are moving forward that Matt just described gives us the opportunity to really develop the supply chain and the series of projects that makes it possible to have learning, which we know helps reduce costs as you move from first of a kind to nth of a kind. So I think that, the stage is set for the potential, successful deployment of nuclear at scale, and we'll see whether we can achieve that. In terms of challenges, I think I might be repeating a little bit what Matt said, but I want to emphasize that uncertainty right now is a major challenge. So uncertainty in how the executive orders will be implemented, uncertainty in the budget moving forward and how the Department of Energy budget will be implemented. And so it's really important to move from these big announcements right into implementation and achieve some of that certainty that's needed to support investors and projects.
All right, that's perfect. And I love the stage has been set, and now we need to get on with it, like with real world progress, and then that begets additional real world progress. So let's use that as a jumping off point. And Matt, maybe a question for you. Let's start with the EOs, but again, I want to broaden this to the other pieces of the puzzle that need to come together if we're going to be successful here. Let's just start with safety, if we could, Matt. The EOs have a lot of different language in a lot of different areas. I'd love to just get your take on the importance to make sure that the reality and the perception of safety is there. Certainly, if we're thinking of this in long-term support for communities all across the country and all across the world as well, and to make sure that we don't take our eye off the ball. So if you could just comment a little bit on the importance of safety as we go throughout this, and anything that you'd like to say about the EOs on that particular issue as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And I want to say there are parts of the executive orders that I do support. These recent 4 executive orders on nuclear. As you alluded to on nuclear safety, there's one executive order that's focused on the NRC, which I think is problematic in combination with an earlier executive order, 14215. In terms of undermining the independence of the nuclear safety regulator, the NRC, which historically is something that neither Republican nor Democratic administrations have done. It's easy enough to find international reports on nuclear safety, including from the International Atomic Energy Agency, emphasizing the importance of having an independent regulator, reports from the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, stating that it's not enough for nuclear power plant operators to have a good safety culture. There needs to be a strong independent regulator. I just want to read one quote from the National Academy of Sciences Engineering and Medicine report from 2014, Lessons Learned from the Fukushima Nuclear Accident for Improving Safety at U.S. Nuclear Plants. To be effectively independent, the regulatory body shall have sufficient authority and sufficient staffing, and shall have access to sufficient financial resources for the proper discharge of its assigned responsibilities. The regulatory body shall be able to make independent regulatory judgments and decisions free from any undue influences that might compromise safety, such as pressures associated with changing political circumstances or economic conditions, or pressures from government departments or other organizations. So suffices to say, the report goes on to note that examinations of the Japanese regulatory system following the Fukushima accident concluded that the regulatory agencies there were not independent and were subject to regulatory capture. The whole idea of having an independent regulator is to keep it free of industry and political influence. But this is a section from the earlier executive order 14215. It shall be the policy of the executive branch to ensure presidential supervision and control of the entire executive branch. Moreover, all executive departments and agencies, including so-called independent agencies, shall submit for review all proposed and final significant regulatory actions to the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs within the Executive Office of the President. And just one more quote. The director of OMB shall on an ongoing basis review independent regulatory agencies' obligations for consistency with the president's policies and priorities, and consult with independent regulatory agency chairmen and adjust such agencies' apportionments by activity, function, project, or object as necessary and appropriate to advance the president's policies and priorities. Such adjustments to apportionments may prohibit independent regulatory agencies from expending appropriations on particular activities, functions, projects, or objects. So in the most concrete terms, this stance, this interference from the White House undercuts the independence of the NRC, which is a crucial ingredient for protecting the public, as well as public confidence in nuclear safety. The budget and staff cuts mentioned in the recent executive order also threaten the NRC's abilities to safely regulate nuclear power. And I'll just very quickly mention a couple of other specific examples from the executive order focused on the NRC that I think are problematic. The direction to, with the DOGE team and the White House Office of Management Budget, undertake a wholesale revision and review of the regulations and guidance documents, issuing proposed rulemaking in 9 months, final rules and guidances within 18 months. To state the obvious, the review and replacement of NRC regulations should not be rushed, particularly if the staff is cut. and the deadlines in the executive order don't recognize that many of the advanced reactors present novel safety issues, which will require careful analysis, experimental analysis, and verified codes. The NRC certainly needs to become more efficient, but for anyone watching, it's also clearly pursuing implementation of the Advance Act without this executive order. I will wrap up, but there's another section that says the NRC has to make a final decision after no more than 18 months on an application to construct and operate a new reactor of any type. I read that as clearly a combined license under Part 52 with no allowance for first-of-a-kind deployment, and first-of-a-kind combined licenses should not be rushed. I don't think the Advisory Committee on Reactor Safeguards, which is the body in statute that provides independent reviews of NRC staff evaluations, should be reduced. And finally, I disagree with this notion of having the NRC not do a thorough review of a particular application if the reactor in question happens to have been licensed by DoD or DOE. This is a kind of backdoor to get NRC licensing without actually having the NRC license it, which is the only agency that should license for commercial deployment. I'll stop there.
All right, super helpful, Matt. And I've got one follow-up question, and we're going to get into the budget and staffing, and I'm going to ask each of our panelists what they like about the EOs as well. But let me just follow up a little bit, if I could, Matt, with what you were just saying and the importance of the independence of NRC. And certainly what comes through with the timelines that you just read off is certainly a sense of, I don't know if frustration is the right word, but a sense that we need to move quicker. And we need to be more nimble in terms of doing the due diligence that's necessary to approve. What I'd like to do is just have you comment and take a step back at diagnosing the challenges and the problems. There's some language in one of the EOs about the NRC throttling the industry. I think Ashley's point was a really interesting one. When you have static demand, when you don't have an increase in electricity demand, you don't have that kind of pull in a way that we have right now, which I think is an interesting dynamic, and curious to get your take on that, Matt, about how important that's been, or how important that can be going forward to have that pull for new nuclear coming into the system. But if you could give us your expert judgment on whether the NRC has been throttling new activity, new developments, and how to think about both trying to do things efficiently, but also trying to do things appropriately, especially because you don't want to win the battle and lose the war, right? If you approve something that's not ready for prime time, you want to make sure that, especially when you're dealing with nuclear power, doing it right. So just comment a little bit on diagnosing what the challenge has been at NRC, and then and maybe this will bleed over. I'm going to turn to you, Ashley, to talk about the budget and staffing, not just at NRC, but at Nuclear Energy Office, NE, at the Department of Energy too, because part of my experience in government is EOs are great and plans are great, but it all comes down to execution and having the bandwidth and tools in the tool belt to execute. So we'll get to that as well. But Matt, over to you on the diagnosis.
Yeah, and first off, I've written on how the NRC could become more efficient, either with help from Congress or otherwise. I believe there is room for improvement at NRC. I think the NRC would agree with that. And it is clearly ready to lean forward on reform. It's acting on new laws such as Advance. But I do take issue with the way the executive order sort of apparently lays the problems of the nuclear industry at the foot of the regulator. There's the section that talks about after 1978, the NRC has only authorized a fraction of the construction of nuclear power plants that were approved from 1954 to 1978, and only 2 have entered service. The implication I think people would clearly read is that somehow the NRC is the culprit. The order doesn't talk about any other factors that would be behind this. I would just say the reality is there weren't that many applications submitted to the NRC after 1978 to construct new nuclear power plants for reasons that aren't hard to discern. You had accidents in the 1970s that made the public more wary of nuclear power. Brown's Ferry in 1975, more famously 3 Mile Island in 1979, double-digit inflation at the end of the 1970s and early 1980s, mismanagement of nuclear power plant construction, Chernobyl in 1986. And the EO doesn't mention that the NRC still issued dozens of operating licenses during this time period in the 1980s and 1990s. If you fast forward to the 2010s, when it seemed like the United States might build some large light water reactors, there were applications to the NRC to build AP1000s, ESBWRs, ABWRs. The order doesn't note that the NRC issued construction and operation licenses for 14 new reactors. So at that point, you can't say the regulator's the problem. Why didn't they all move forward? Only 4 of them started construction for reasons that are known. The fall in natural gas prices, which made nuclear less competitive, leveling off of electrical demand following the financial collapse in 2008. And then the ones that went forward went badly, which is not the NRC's fault. The 4 AP1000s, you had 2 in South Carolina that were canceled after $9 billion in expenditures, after Westinghouse went bankrupt, 2 in Georgia that finished, but they were more than double the cost and schedule. Those experiences made utilities more wary of building new nuclear, and you can't blame the NRC for that. And I'll just note that right now we have this crop of reactor designs with applications before the NRC. The NRC has issued permits for the Kairos Hermes project in Tennessee, the follow-on project Hermes 2, and there was improvement from Hermes to Hermes 2. It was about 2 years to about 1 year. That kind of efficiency, improvement should be acknowledged. You have these other applications for TerraPower and X Energy. Those have been docketed and seem to be proceeding on pace. The NRC, the order talks about the NRC failing to license, but really none of the combined license applications for the large light water reactors were designed. None of the recent ones I just mentioned were denied. The NRC only denied 1 application from Oklo a number of years ago, and I would have said it was because the application was not a quality application, which is another element to the executive order that's not mentioned, which is industry has a responsibility to submit quality applications if they want efficient licensing. So I'll stop there. I'm sure we'll talk more.
Well, super helpful, Matt, and we're going to get to good things that we see in the EOs as well. But let me turn to you, Ashley, if I could. Certainly anything that you want to comment on the questions we were just talking with Matt. But I'd love to get your take on the execution piece and the importance of people and the importance of budget going forward. And if you can give a sense to our listeners here, where we're at in terms of the budget proposal, where we're at in terms of the staffing equation as well, and just talk about why that's, if that's important and why that's important. So over to you, Ashley.
Sure.
And sorry, before you go, folks should start putting their questions in the chat. I've got a couple more questions I definitely want to get to because I think they're front of center for everybody, but we'll start turning to some audience questions here soon too. Ashley.
Great. So focusing on what we know about the budget, I guess what we have the most information on so far is the proposed budget for the Department of Energy, Office of Nuclear Energy, and then Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, which was supporting some of the demos in nuclear up to now. And OSED is proposed to be eliminated. And then DOE-NE is proposed to have approximately a 20% budget cut. So without going.
Hey, Ashley, can I pause there? We'll try to make this as interactive and lively for folks. Were you surprised that the administration proposed a budget cut in NE, given the rhetoric and given the focus on nuclear, or does that seem consistent in some way?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not terribly surprised because I think that the posture has been to cut budgets in general. I noticed that the DOE Office of Nuclear Energy has a much lesser cut than other parts of DOE, where EERE was cut maybe 75%, or I'm not sure, Dave. I bet you know.
Yeah, I think it was at least 75%.
Yeah. So that indicates that the administration's cuts are meant to be less severe for nuclear energy. So kind of consistent. But the real challenge here is that the executive orders propose enormous investments. They propose or direct programs to operate nuclear reactors at military facilities within a couple of years, programs to operate nuclear reactors at DOE sites in 30 months, programs to really move out on fuel supply and reprocessing, and a couple of other things, but big projects that the administration wants to move out on very quickly. And the DOE budget has a cut in fuel cycle R&D. It has a cut in the advanced reactor demonstration program from the previous enacted. So perhaps it's appropriate, perhaps it's what they need right now. I don't know that level of detail. But I think that there is some tension here between the budget cuts at NE and the proposed projects that suggest enormous investment, and that will have to come from somewhere. And if it's not from the NE budget, I'm sure there's a hypothesis that much of it will come from the private sector, but I don't think it will be the private sector alone. So it will need to come from the NE budget or the DoD budget or somewhere else. And we have yet to see where those increased investments are reflected in the budget. I think that it'll be really important to understand the view or the vision that Congress has for the budget moving forward. And I'll stop there for now, Dave.
That's super helpful, Ashley. And of course, for those who don't follow Congress super closely, we have a number of budget-related efforts, right? We have the regular annual appropriations process. That's what Ashley was talking about in terms of that 24% cut for the Nuclear Energy Office. That's through the yearly appropriations process. And then we also have right now the big, beautiful bill, as the president has called it, the reconciliation package, which includes some significant cuts. I would say some drastic and dramatic cuts, at least the House version, to the tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act, including the tech neutral tax credit, which is applicable on the nuclear side. Now, we saw some interesting dynamics late in the House process that at least some of that on nuclear was walked back to a certain extent. But just give us a state of play, if you could, on where things are at with reconciliation. It's now in the Senate, of course, and the senators are taking a look at it, including some very strong nuclear supporters in the Senate. But walk us through if it was a surprise that nuclear got whacked along with other parts of the clean energy spectrum in those IRA tax rescissions. And what do you make of that last minute, last day attempt to at least change some of the timelines associated with nuclear and how workable that's going to be? To your point, Ashley, in terms of whether it's government funding or private sector funding, we need some funding, right? If we're going to get especially small modular reactors, advanced reactors up and running, certainly at any time scale that we'd like to see them up and running. So if you guys can, open question for both of you, talk to us about reconciliation, what's important to keep our eye on that side of things when it comes to nuclear. Ashley, do you want to take a first crack? And then Matt, certainly, if you've got thoughts, and then we'll turn to the EOs and then we'll start turning to some audience questions.
Okay, great. Yeah, I have a couple comments and then we'll turn to Matt. And I actually, Dave, I want to go back a little bit, sorry, to your previous question about people and the importance of people, because I didn't get into that enough. The projects that are proposed in the EOs will require, in order to move at speed, they're going to require significant review, oversight, and engagement from the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense, the NRC, depending on which project you're talking about, and cuts to staff are in tension with that. And we've seen significant retirements from the Department of Energy that impact DOE's ability to move at the speed that the EOs direct. So it will require either additional staff for those efforts or reprioritization where existing staff really focus on those priorities, and that will leave other things at a lower priority, of course. So I think it's really important to understand that the Department of Energy has an important role in authorizing these defense and DOE related reactors, and they need to have staff to be able to do that. Going to reconciliation, I think what we've seen does indicate some of that bipartisan support for nuclear and the desire to continue to have these tax credits and other things, loan program office efforts that support nuclear build and nuclear deployment. So I think it's a good sign, but we're really, the jury's still out on where it will end up at the end of the process. Matt, what would you add to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's it. I mean, we're now waiting on the Senate to weigh in, and I don't know if I hope the Senate doesn't keep the accelerated phase out of these tax credits. I hope we can preserve the DOE loan programs to support new nuclear projects, but we're going to be in a bit of waiting to see. It's an interesting dynamic that the nuclear industry is kind of having to play defense right now in real time, try and keep some of these tax credits.
Yeah, it is super interesting. I personally would not have predicted that. I would have thought that nuclear would have been taken care of in the base bill in terms of the reconciliation package as it was through the House. Now, obviously, they were trying to do a whole bunch of things, and who knows what happened in that kind of context. And as I mentioned, there was some partial fixes for nuclear in the House version, but I've seen some different analysis there that it's not enough in terms of the timelines if you really want to have the incentives that are necessary to get the kind of really big ramp up that certainly a lot of us who follow these issues would like to see, and of course done the right way going forward. Let's actually, before I switch over to the EOs more generally and ask your thoughts on other parts of the EOs, especially parts of the EOs you think are constructive and helpful, talk a little bit about the loan program. I was just on the phone with my good friend Jigar Shah, who ran the loan program for us in the Biden administration, and he's been on the record publicly about how important the loan program is for nuclear. That was the program that we used to get some funding to Palisades to get that restarted. We've had conversations, I guess I should speak now in the past tense since I'm no longer at the Department of Energy, but there were a lot of conversations that I was aware of with a variety of different nuclear companies to use the loan program as a tool, as a part to try to help the financing, to try to help de-risk some of these projects going forward. Give us a sense of how important you think the loan program can be. And then maybe to your earlier point on personnel as well, Ashley, you've got to have people there who have the expertise and can have those conversations and move things through the pipeline, again, as quickly as possible. So just talk about the loan program piece, and then we'll go to EOs and again, start asking questions for folks in the chat so that we can make sure that we're answering the questions that you all are interested in.
Great, thanks, Dave. I think that the loan programs have been very important for nuclear and continue to be. One of the mechanisms that is established, there's a process it's set up, and so it can be fast, it can be deployed quickly, whereas a new program will need to be set up. So if we think about how we get from through the first several, right, first of a kind, second of a kind, getting out to nth of a kind, I think that there's a broad agreement that those first reactors take on additional risk. The builders and stakeholders in those first reactors take on supply chain risk, workforce risk, variety of challenges that we saw, for example, in the Vogtle projects, and may see again in first of a kind projects. And so there's a need for some sort of support to help move those projects forward, to get us to nth of a kind where we have deployment at scale without necessarily, subsidies or supports. And the Loan Programs Office is one of the great tools we have to provide that support. Like I said, it's set up, it's here, we can use it now. I think it played a really vital role in the Vogtle project. I think that the Loan Programs Office providing $12 billion in loan guarantees combined with the PUC's willingness to move forward are the reason that project was completed compared with VC Summer, which was not. So I think that it's shown that it's vitally important and valuable. As you mentioned, there's a loan guarantee for the Palisades restart. Also, I'm sure was very important to getting that deal done. So we see that it works, and it's really important, I think, as a tool that we have now and can continue to use for this aspirational large deployment of nuclear that the administration has put forward. Certainly you need staff to run that. I think that you made the point, and I don't need to add to that, but yeah, I think it's very important. So thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. And it's not only quantity of staff. I'm the first one, having spent the last 4 years at the Department of Energy, to say that the federal bureaucracy needs constant continual improvement in making sure that we're spending taxpayer dollars as wisely as we possibly can. So it's not only quantity of staff, it's quality of staffing, having the right incentives to attract that kind of talent that you want into the government, and making sure that you don't lose that institutional knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. And I've got a whole series of thoughts on DOGE and some of the things that have happened on the personnel side of things. One of the things that makes me optimistic is the new political appointee heading the Nuclear Energy Office. Ted Garish is someone I've known for years, a veteran of the Department of Energy, someone who's been in these circles for quite some time, very passionate on nuclear, and hopefully Ted has a successful tenure at the Nuclear Energy Office. Matt, anything else you want to comment on the loan program? And then I'm going to ask one more question on the EOs, and then we're starting to get some good questions in the chat as well.
Yeah, I'll just add on. I mean, there's the potential for the AP1000s at VC Summer to get restarted. Loan program could be helpful there. You've got entities like the nuclear company that seems to be trying to deploy, say, like 6 AP1000s at the same time, where they could probably really use tens of billions of dollars of low-cost debt. In other areas, it's not clear to me that TVA, by virtue of its nature, actually would need this for Clinch River. I don't have as much visibility on Kairos, X-Energy, and TerraPower, but when President Obama personally announced the conditional loan guarantee for Vogtle in 2010, that was a big deal. And then the first Trump administration issued additional loan guarantee to keep Vogtle going after the Westinghouse bankruptcy. So it has been an important tool.
All right. Super interesting questions. I'm just reading through with the chat, and keep them coming, and we'll try to get to as many as we are able to. We've got a little over 20 minutes. We'll get a little bit more to the EOs, but the questions are so good that I can't not start asking the questions, if that's okay, Matt and Ashley. And we'll start with a question. With the executive order targeting 10 reactors under construction by 2030, it seems like the first 2 to 4 reactors will likely hold the most risks, as the supply chains are not built out yet, thus have the most risk for cost overruns. This person's heard utilities would be happy to build reactors 5 plus, but what will it take for the first utilities to start construction of the first 2 to 4 reactors? I think it's an excellent question, and for anyone who's worked with utilities in terms of wanting to have others, one of my favorite jokes about utility CEOs is they're always first to be second. They want others to do the first reactors, others to do the first proof of certain technologies. And then once that's proved out, of course, they will come in when things are de-risked. So if you guys can answer this really insightful questions about how utilities perceive and work in the world, and what's it going to take to get those first 2 to 4 so we can get the reactors 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I think it's a great question, and related to the point I made about the need for LPO, Loan Programs Office, for those first reactors to get to nth of a kind. I also would submit that utilities aren't the only customer right now, and utilities may not be the best builder for some of these first of a kind plants. So we do have others like Dow Chemical working with X-Energy on their first of a kind reactor. Executive orders suggest a number of reactors that are AI data center focused at DOE sites, as well as DoD focused reactors. So I think there are creative ways to move forward with first of a kind plants that don't necessarily require a utility to be first. But where utilities are going first and second, I think we're seeing the involvement of loans, and I think there's potential to use other mechanisms that offer government support, whether that's a milestone-based program for incentives to move forward, or other grants for data centers, things like that. I think that we do need some support for those early reactors, as well as new customers that we're starting to see moving forward. And then I'll turn it over to Matt, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, the developments last year with the hyperscalers, the Google and Amazon announcements were the most fascinating to me. I mean, it does seem like they're kind of the tip of the spear, in the sense that they've reportedly been willing to pay above market rates as they've made these climate commitments to being powered by low carbon energy. And they don't seem to think they can do it solely with renewables and storage. And so they've turned to nuclear. So we'll see if there are more hyperscaler announcements. There's some entities that have talked about potentially building more reactors that haven't made announcements yet. We just had the Meta announcement. I do think the tax credits and the loan programs are some of the best tools for helping to get through this first of a kind barrier. Another thing that I'm watching, the Trump administration asked folks to reapply for this Gen 3++, the Lightwater SMR awards, which nominally I would think they would make the awards sometime this summer. But that's another tool that it was directed by Congress, could help get utilities, over this sort of first of a kind hump.
All right, super helpful. Let's just stick on, there's a really interesting question on AI and data centers. And of course, that is getting a lot of attention, just as you said, Matt, and Ashley, you said that as well. There's a question, I'm going to ask the question, then put my own little spin on it too. The question in the chat is there any way to scrub all the announcements by hyperscalers and come up with a more qualified expected demand growth from AI data centers? And also once training is over and when most of the demand is from inference alone. So just double click, if you will, on what you see as the actual demand coming from the AI side, both near term, medium term, and as we think about longer term as well. And Matt, you just got into the loan program and the tax credits being an important part of going from announcements. Announcements are great, but my experience in the real world is I'd much rather have real projects getting built and constructed, because that's how you get even more real projects, to the earlier question as well. So talk about anything else that we need to see in this AI hyperscaler opportunity for nuclear to actually get to some projects, steel in the ground, concrete in the ground, as they say.
Yeah, and I'm afraid I don't have special insight into what the AI hyperscalers actually need. I can do nothing other than believe them at face value. I will add another thing that we haven't mentioned thus far is there was also the recent announcement by Google partnering with Elemental to provide some early stage capital to prepare 3 potential sites for advanced reactor projects, each aiming for at least 600 megawatts of capacity. I don't know how to interpret this other than Google sincerely thinks that they are going to need the demand. I don't understand why they would otherwise invest this money. So to me, that's kind of the proof in the pudding. But otherwise, I don't have any special insight into the hyperscalers.
Thanks, Matt. And the best piece of analysis I've seen on what to expect, at least in the US, for AI and data center electricity demand is the work by Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, one of the Department of Energy national labs. They've been doing analysis, this group, for decades, literally, in terms of data centers and how much electricity is used. What they've seen in 2023, their estimate is about 4.4% of electricity in the US is going to data centers, of which AI is just a small part, a growing part, but a relatively small part still. And their estimate is by 2028, that could go up to 6.7% on the low end and as high as 12% of overall electricity use in the US. And that is much less a double counting analysis that some others have done. It's looking at the chips, it's looking at things very bottom up. So to me, that's the most rigorous analysis, just kind of looking big picture. And of course, there's the question then of where those chunky reactors, chunky in terms of, or where those chunky data centers are actually going to be located, and then matching up the supply piece of it. Ashley, anything else you want to talk about on the AI front and what it's going to take to actually leverage that in the real world to get concrete in the ground?
I think you've both covered it well, but I guess I'll add that it's not just AI, it's all compute. And while I don't have special insight into what the AI data center demand will be, I've looked at a lot of projections and I don't see any that are predicting it's going to come down. They're all going up and to the right. So I think I feel pretty confident that we're going to see an increase and we're going to need to meet that demand, ideally with clean, firm energy. And we've discussed some of the kinds of supports that are needed for nuclear energy to move that forward. I guess another question in the comment was about when training is over and most of the demand is from inference alone. I think that we would be I think it'd be misguided to think that training is going to be over at some point. I think training is going to continue, just like all learning continues, and we'll have continuing demand for that load. So I don't project a need for less training in the near term. So that's all I'll add, Dave.
Yeah, that was super good. And thanks for picking up that so that we'll make sure we're fully responsive to what questions folks are asking. All right, here's another one. And Matt, maybe to have you start with this, but certainly Ashley, if you want to come in. The questioner says, Matt stressed appropriately, in my view, as the parenthetical, the importance of an independent NRC for public confidence. The question was, what are industry players saying about the new EOs and the implications for NRC? What have we heard either publicly or if you can share anonymously things that you've heard privately as well? And specifically, the questioner asks, are the industry players concerned that a loss of regulatory independence could lead to threats to public acceptance, kind of the argument or the point you were making earlier, Matt. So what do we know about what industry thinks about these EOs, at least this part of the EO?
Yeah, and I'll say this is recent enough, late breaking enough that I haven't actually seen industry folks in person or had real conversations with them to ask them that question. But I will take that as homework because I would be really interested to hear if any of them will. I suspect they would only privately admit to concern over it if they do. But certainly in discussions with former NRC staff, former NRC commissioners, I have heard that concern voiced over and over. And we've had other folks, former Secretary of Energy Ernie Moniz, voice concern over the undermining of NRC independence and what that could lead to. And you've had former NRC staff and DOE staff actually, former ACRS members voice concern over this. So I think it's still new enough. It still hasn't sorted itself out, but I think it should be an ongoing part of the conversation because it is worrisome.
Well, thanks, Matt. And maybe a little bit of editorializing from my end. I know when we were doing things in the previous administration, we put out EOs or information for comment from folks. And maybe it's different administration to administration. There's no way to do right by the responsibility if you're in government. If you think you know all the answers and you're not open to suggestions and open to constructive criticism as well. We learned an awful lot from our requests for information, both through the formal processes, but informal conversations as well. And if you're going to make progress, especially in an area that like nuclear power, which in my opinion is going to require phenomenal private sector leadership, but it's also going to require the public and the government doing the kinds of things to help those private sector players be successful. You need to be open to that back and forth, that dynamic, that constructive criticism. So my hope is that the nuclear industry, that other players will make their voices heard, all in a spirit of constructive, how do we work together to take advantage of the opportunity space we got it. All right, editorializing aside, Ashley, anything else that you want to say, answer on this point? And then we've got a bunch of other questions as well.
I will let you get to the other questions.
All right, so there's a few questions on safety in particular and on the back end. Let me summarize a long question. While many hurdles are discussed, cost, safety, time, et cetera, the lack of a federal long-term storage plan, repository, or large-scale reprocessing is a federal hurdle impacting state conversations. What is your perspective on the U.S. moving forward with a consent-based siting process similar to Canada or building a repository similar to Finland in the near future? And I'd ask you both to think big picture on this question, but also anything that we've seen in the EOs or other parts of the discussion with this administration, or maybe constructive advice that you would have for this administration on that issue as well.
Okay, I guess I can take first shot at that. I think there have been some statements out of the administration on this. I think they're using the language of collaborative siting, and I've noted in well, okay, I guess it hasn't come out yet, but earlier this year, the first Secretary of Energy, Rick Perry, wrote an op-ed where he talked about during his term as Secretary of Energy, it became clear to him that moving spent nuclear fuel is going to require the practical consent of a state. And I took some optimism from that op-ed that, you know, maybe there's an opportunity here in this second Trump administration to do some work in this direction and make some progress on both siting of storage facilities and also disposal facilities. And yeah, I mean, call it whatever you want: consent-based, practical consent, collaborative siting. You know, this issue of you need to have a local community that's in support of the project, and you need to have a state that at least is willing to let you go forward, isn't opposed to it. I very much hope that there's some progress there. One of the executive orders did touch on spent nuclear fuel management and disposal. I think that would be great. I would love to see Secretary Wright engage with Congress on, you know, creating a new single purpose organization to handle the nuclear waste management function. Something reports have been recommending since the 70s. I actually would be surprised if DOE wouldn't want to get that function out of the agency to a new one that has greater continuity over political cycles, access to the funding it needs. I hope that is an area of focus.
Well, and from my experience, at least, it takes an awful lot of good faith conversations. And I think, Matt, you point out appropriately so, it's not just the local community that's important, it's the state political dynamic as well, and making sure that we're thinking of both of those relevant actors or set of actors. Ashley, anything else you want to say on the safety piece? And maybe I'll add in a question here as well, or the long-term storage piece. There's a question here. In the US right now, I believe 0% of nuclear waste is recycled. However, there is now tech that allows 90% of nuclear to be recycled. In Europe, approximately 96 to 97% of their spent nuclear fuel is recycled. Does the nuclear order from the administration talk about recycling nuclear waste at all? And or what do you think the future of recycling spent nuclear fuel will look like? What kind of additional storage will for spent nuclear fuel will be built? So you've got a few questions here, I think, Ashley, and then Matt, if you want to chime in as well. More broadly, in terms of the nuclear storage issue to the recycling piece, and maybe related to that, any non-proliferation issues or any other things that are relevant as we think about recycling, and what the EOs have said about that, or what we've heard from this administration on those issues.
Yeah, so that's a great question. We do have some material on that. There is in the national security EO, so deploying advanced nuclear reactor technologies for national security. There's a section on reprocessing and recycling, both for initial supply of fuel and then ongoing recycling. The EO directs that DOE provide at least 20 tons of high assay, low enriched uranium immediately for projects at DOE-owned sites that power AI, and then also directs identifying US stockpiles that can be recycled into new fuel, and then further directs that there's an authorization of construction of a fuel recycling facility at a DOE or DoD site in a public-private partnership of some sort. So there's been, I think, a willingness to evaluate recycling of the last administration or two, and to look at it more than we have in many years. And the executive orders really drive that forward at a strong pace. So I think that there will be questions around proliferation concerns, particularly using plutonium fuels, but we have seen the use of, for example, MOX fuel in the past, and trying to downblend previously weapons material into commercial fuel. So there's some precedent for that, but this moves forward in a way that we haven't seen the US move forward in decades. Matt, do you have additional comments?
Yeah, on reprocessing, I think the question is the questions are, what is the objective you're trying to achieve? Who's going to pay for it? Is this something that's supposed to come out of the nuclear waste fund? And on the nonproliferation side, it's been long-standing U.S. policy to discourage the spread of enrichment and reprocessing technologies to new countries. So the question will be, are we talking about exporting any of these reprocessing technologies? So there are a variety of different reprocessing technologies out there. My view is the commercially ready Purex-like processes for a light water reactor based energy system don't add real value. But I know there are a lot of reprocessing technologies that are under development, which could potentially be different.
All right, we've got 2 minutes left. We've got more questions than we can answer, unfortunately, but if folks want to follow up further, we can try to facilitate discussions offline as well. I want to end with this question, and unfortunately, you guys each have 45 seconds because I'll need 30 seconds to do wrap up. The question is, can you do a compare and contrast of why the U.S. has fallen behind in nuclear energy compared to countries like China? First question, if that's actually accurate or not in terms of new nuclear technologies. But what's something we know now that we wish we had known or done a decade ago? And I want to add a part of the question going forward. What do you hope we don't? What do you hope we do now that we won't regret 10 years from now and look back and say, oh crap, we really had a phenomenal opportunity, but here's the one thing that I wish we would have really kept our eye on the ball to take advantage of the opportunity in front of us. So final question for both of you, and again, keep it to about 30, 45 seconds each. Ashley, you want to go first, and then we'll conclude with Matt, and then I'll just say a few words to wrap us up.
Sure, I'm not sure I retained all of those, but I hope that that this time around we go ahead and get into serial and parallel construction of the same product. It can be multiple products, but we can't build one of 5 different kinds. We need to build 5 of each to get our supply chain set up, to get learning, to get construction costs down. A principal problem we have is mega project related cost overruns and schedule overruns. And so that's what we need to address most importantly, and we can do that by building out to nth of a kind, not just first of a kind.
Nth of a kind, that's the mantra, everybody. I've heard that from a lot of smart people, and thank you, Ashley. Really good concluding remarks. Matt, over to you for 30, 45 seconds.
Yeah, in terms of why we've fallen behind China, they obviously have a different government structure. If they decide they're going to build new nuclear, they build new nuclear. So they've been doing it consistently for a while now, and looks like they're going to continue to build. What do I wish we'd done 10 years ago? Had a climate policy. Maybe one of these tech-neutral tax credits 10 years ago. What do I think we'd regret today? Getting rid of the tax credits, getting rid of the loan programs office, and I think it would be good to rescind some of these executive orders relative to the NRC. We didn't have time, but there are other parts of the executive orders I do support and think are positive.
Good. Just give us 10 seconds on that, Matt. What's one area that you think particularly useful from the EOs?
Yeah, so there's some sections in the Deploying Advanced Nuclear Reactor Technologies for National Security order focused on financial export strategy, implementing programs to compete for global nuclear energy projects. It's been a consistent challenge for the US government. We have all these different private entities. We all love them equally. But there are some challenges with them trying to compete against these state-owned entities where the head of the government may show up and lobby for this reactor to go, and they can bundle in all kinds of incentives. So if the Trump administration can come up with a good plan on those fronts and execute it, I think that would be great and would help with the United States competing.
Well, thanks, Matt. I think that's a terrific place to end. Let me just do 2 things really quickly. Actually, 3 things. First, thanks you, Matt. Thank you, Ashley, for participating and for being such phenomenal experts and constructive players in this space more generally. Secondly, thank you both for doing such a good job setting the stage and talking about the opportunities and the challenges. as I said in my opening comments, I personally think we've got a phenomenal opportunity here, given some of the broader trends. But we're not going to be successful unless we have tools in the tool belt. We have people who are able to execute on this from the private sector, from the public sector, and we have a lot of discussion back and forth. I think one of the strengths in our government, our system of society, is we can have open conversations. We can make sure we're thinking all these things through together so that we have a plan that does exactly what Matt and Ashley were talking about and what was explicit or implicit in a lot of the questioners as well. And then lastly, keep an eye out for further rapid response webinars like this on particularly timely issues. We're going to be trying to do a lot more of this from the Columbia Center on Global Energy Policy, and just appreciate everybody being here today. And thank you again, Matt and Ashley. Thanks, everybody.